Hi everyone, my name is Urbanism. I am an architect and a researcher by training. I also teach at UCL. FYI, I am not a software architect, I am a building architect, which is not so different principally as both are trying to put ideas out there to maximize choices within the system. So my work stands at the convergence of virtual and physical infrastructures, and today I'll be discussing with you the application of real-time media and algorithmic personalization in urbanism, a live stream economy. But before I do so, I'd like to give you a little disciplinary context, which is going to show you in a more concrete manner why live stream economy. So in the space where climate change mitigation and building design overlap, there is green architecture, which is an approach to building that minimizes the harmful effects of constructions on our environment. Nonetheless, the spectrum of color should really be expanded to accommodate more than just one class of building that passively assures ecological health, but a full category of functionality that actively recovers our geoconditions. For instance, there should be a spectrum of green architecture that is not only designed for energy efficiency, but actively functions to facilitate, let's say, regenerative agriculture. There should be red architecture, which functions for the support of forest fire resistance. Blue architecture for ocean iron fertilization. Yellow architecture for carbon capture and storage, CCS. Brown architecture for soil carbon sequestration, and so on and so forth. These are but some examples that I'm putting on the table for now to start the conversation, but the spectrum should really be expanded to accommodate many more colors. So there are three main questions that my research tries to investigate. First, how much human, architectural, infrastructural, and economic capital will such an active decarbonization system demand? Let's take the yellow architecture as an example, which is carbon capture and storage, CCS. According to Jean Holy book, under our 2-degree carbon budget, we will have to capture and remove 10 gigatons of CO2 in our atmosphere by the end of the century, which is 2100. To capture 1 gigaton would demand about 1,000 facilities. To capture 10 gigaton, we will need 10,000 facilities starting from this moment. Presently, we have about 22 of them, so we are already far behind schedule. This means we will need not only architecture, but infrastructure on the order of the existing fossil fuel industry. It took more than a century for our oil industries to get to where we are today, but we don't have another century to lose. We will need decarbonization strategies that can generate profit as much as fossil fuel, if not more. In order to realize this amount of work, our architectural pedagogy is at the forefront. So the second question is, how many do we have to educate in order to decarbonize? So that's an economy of architectural education in itself. We will need a large capacity of architects who are equipped with such forms of interdisciplinary knowledge. On the other hand, the design of decarbonization system is an interdisciplinary problem. Thus, we will need means to search for tools that falls between the established fields of expertise, promotes cross-exchanges, cross-communication, and cross-stacking. Last but not least, different countries have different latent carbon capacities due to their differing available natural and artificial resources. For instance, Sweden has about 4.5 gigatons of CO2 storage space, whereas Norway, which is just next door, has about 21 gigatons capacity. Potentially, the two countries can negotiate on carbon trade, have some of Sweden's shipped to Norway, and have it stored under the sea. If we look halfway across the Earth, China has about 65 to 1,500 gigatons storage capacity. As you can see, the gap for approximation is relatively high. The reason behind is that there are always unpredictable fluctuations in geological and demographic factors. And you can imagine the larger the country, the larger the uncertainty. Also, all these numbers that I pulled from different research, they're all projected based on different estimated scenarios. So all these will have to be calculated and indexed according to variables such as mass of population, how much energy this country is exporting in the support for global consumption, and so on. So it's not as easy as saying that, this one country seems to be over budget on numbers and we just focus on regulating her. but more like how do we have a planetary scale collaborative index on such numbers, according to what variables, what scenarios. So see, these are some important questions to ask for any initiative that wish to participate in the carbon economy and have all these data transparent and immutable so as to incentivize international exchanges to distribute both rights and responsibilities, have risk allocation over large-scale collaborative contracting. Thus, we would need means to enable nodes across geographical and territorial boundaries to communicate in real time. And most importantly is to prevent shadow economies, to prevent situations like some countries exporting the CO2 to less privileged ones off the book. So instead of solely depending on regulation, it's also helpful to think about why and how businesses will be willing to engage and do things the proper way. Meaning, how do we incentivize international decarbonization supply chains? How can they generate profit? And altogether, how can we gauge supply and demand more accurately within our trades? So this is the same on an industrial level. Different industries have different latent carbon capacities. For instance, the carbon footprint for computing can be mitigated relatively easy with solutions such as solar energy. But things like airplane transportations, aviations has much lower latent capacities simply because there is for now no alternative energy source but fossil fuel. So there's a lot of talk about carbon trading, but it's actually very challenging to sense and regulate carbon emission. Suppose we can have every factory to install and live stream their bispectral camera. Even if we do that, it's still quite inefficient. So perhaps it's helpful to think again from an incentive point of view about how industries can share not just the load of carbon with each other, but the load of work, where together they can maximize the total payoff. So to maximize coalition in cooperative games. For instance, to share the load of work of the tourism industry with the live stream industry, while both maintaining their increase in total productivity. So virtual space dependency has always been controversial and may even sound offensive to some. For instance, it's a common folk ontology that automation and computation may take over jobs of humans, especially undermining jobs that are dependent on our built environment, like tourism. But after what we have experienced over the past year, we may begin to reframe these sort of questions differently. For instance, reframing questions like, how can we make trade-offs between tourism and live streams, to asking questions like how we can make more payoffs with tourism live streams so that the live stream space may help to sustain the tourism industry and help out-of-work laborers within economic crisis. This question definitely goes beyond the pandemic and help us in starting to think about the demanded changes to our modes of working for the situations to come, which I'm sure is going to be increasingly challenging. This is where real-time media may be helpful. Even before the pandemic, the live stream economy in China alone had already overcome Hollywood as one of the largest media industries, but its intrinsic properties has the potential to go beyond entertainment because of its participatory authorship. So live stream is a form of decentralized media that enables a feedback of information in real time. In terms of architectural design, the same logic can be applied to virtual desktop. So how can more than one person work on the same architectural model, especially with complex 3D models that take gigabytes of data? How can we have preemptive scheduling to task switch amongst a network of computers? What is the amount of control each node should have? How do we trace and track all the work input? So that's participatory authorship via streaming. Most importantly, how can we direct royalties to content creators and contributors instantly? Much like how we're able to do via live stream platforms. So there is an expansion of value networks. Live stream expands the rigidity of advertising and subscription model that are used to finance digital platforms to a processing of micropayment transactions in real time. For instance, in China, there is a tradition of red pockets which represents the virtue of luck, and digitization enables such forms of microvalues to be sent back and forth between parties in real time via diverse value routes, and that generates cash flow for all kinds of entities, from individuals to corporates. Most livestream platforms design AR or interactive elements for every transaction. So such forms of virtual signaling acts as marginal utility that fosters an attention economy. So this is a significant financial model that we can think about when considering decarbonization, where this microservices architecture can be personalized for diverse carbon business supports. Of course, it is no news that we're living in a world where our everyday lives are guided by the screen time of scrolling between algorithmically recommended contents. And personalization can help us to tackle problems of information overload within an infinite scroll of live streams. But it can do more for us than just preemptive marketing to facilitate participatory design strategies. When we talk about a collective contribution of information, there has to be ways in which we can ensure the interoperability of information at the point of creation to foster a richer common data environment, CDE. But within the design industry, which largely operates on information asymmetry like copyrights, maintaining financial incentives for qualities in work input within the digital common is of equal importance. It's actually one of the greatest challenges, like how do you make sure designers are willing to contribute to a common pool by getting paid accordingly? So if our goal is to enable a multi-access system for decarbonization, there has to be ways in which we can self-organize, for instance, ways to interact in real time and reach consensus on the permutation of architectural information, where the value of such permutation can be realized for each individual. Here I use a work of mine to illustrate what I mean, which I recently published on the topic of coupling blockchain's shared data layer with Beam's common data environment. The question is it possible to index information objects in a decentralized manner amongst a scattered chain of designers and clients, much like what commercial search engines like Google are doing, but instead of a proprietary ranking, individuals should have some sort of participatory control over such ranking. Like a collaborative sorting process with real-time data streams, or incorporating a faulting mechanism to filter out excessive noise within the information system. So this helps to prevent the creation of common data environments that translates Pinterest architecture into Pinterest urbanism. So that's really a problem we have to think about in terms of recommendation and personalization. Together, real-time media and algorithmic personalization can help us to foster a live stream economy for decarbonization with a focus on the following realms. First, education and interdisciplinary research. Second, share the load of work from space and time sharing to work sharing. Third is to generate profit. So my approach to thinking about this wicked problem, which I considered a design problem, is that if there is a soft infrastructure that can aggregate not just our data, but our computing power, a soft infrastructure that help us to circulate units distinct from monetary values. So from GDP to GDCO2, and to trade in a way that the more we exchange, let's say, the healthier the Amazon forest will be. Not in the sense that we just buy more Starbucks coffee and donate to Brazil, because that only adds a layer of mass on top of our accounting profile. So this is some trees being printed on a paper cup. Can you believe that? But to trade with units that are directly tied to information on the forest. So digital currency is definitely something to think about, where blockchain is a good way to tokenize, but that's just a matter of compute. Before that, we would need to deal with sampling. So we would need a network of sensory devices, infrared, remote sensing, low cost, multispectral optical cameras, and so on, anything you name it, so that we can see the health of the forest. We will also need live stream on such data so information can be distributed. Better yet, the live stream is entertaining, so it catches not just large capitals and large investments, but aggregating the efforts of even you and me. For instance, as an average citizen, why would you pay for access to some tree data? Well, how can looking at some trees be entertaining? That's within the expertise of the media industry. One successful example is Alibaba. As you may know, they have different kinds of digital wallets, one of which is the Ant Credit Pay. So that functions like a digital credit card, but instead of monthly payment and expensive transaction fees, you can pay back your debt on a daily basis. And that boils down the time intervals to cash flow. And because they focus on micropayment, it's just easier for non-bank account holders to acquire credit. So it's more far-reaching to rural areas, even indigenous villages. They also have a Yulabao. There's no English name for it. Basically, it's an entertainment bao from Taobao. What it does is that it acts like a savings bank. With the extra money you have in your Taobao digital wallet, you probably don't want to keep transferring between the wallet and your bank account. So Taobao offers you to save that money with them, and they will give you that 7% interest rate in return by venture capital into the entertainment industry and media industries. So that's very live stream economy. The Ant credit together with your Taobao wallet, which partner with many local businesses. They have this tree planting scheme where if the app senses that you lowered your daily carbon footprint, for instance, if you use the subway with a wallet, it will earn you carbon credits, which you can make micropayments to plant a tree. And you have this digital version of your real tree, which is very kawaii to interact with. You can also see all of your friends' trees. So that builds up a carbon value network. And it's exactly a form of virtual signaling. As of today, Alibaba and its users planted about 1 billion trees in China with all these live streaming and micropayment schemes. Also, they really focus on working with technologies that are both technically and financially available for democratization. I am going to briefly introduce 2 of our ongoing design projects that embodies the spirit of the aforementioned research. First is a speculative urbanism project, Current, that thinks about the future of broadcasting cinema and its impact on our cities. So me and my collaborators experimented firsthand with a range of emerging technologies. All are readily available to any individuals, and proposed a production pipeline that facilitates the collective production, processing, broadcasting, and archiving of urban data in real time. So Livestream includes image and metadata, which can be extracted for environment and event reconstruction. With machine learning, we can have estimation on what's behind a foregrounded object, so that is perfect to be coupled with photogrammetry frameworks, which calculates based on vantage points. On the other hand, we experimented with AI image processing like autoencoder, which can help to fill in missing information on texture maps based on archive data, while object detection can help to estimate scene descriptions. So the output volumetric data will then be plugged into personalization algorithms, which will label, rank, and deliver recommended contents by collaborative filtering. Finally, the output will be pulled into displays on demand, which are volumetric navigation engines like VR devices and accessed by a network of users. So this basically helps to reconstruct 3D environments based on multiple vantage points from sequences of 2D images, especially with the ever-mounting terabytes of image data we're producing via social media. So this is a demo we produced in the most economic way possible for participatory purposes. So this facilitates an attention economy where the reconstruction of certain events and environments may direct value back to the entity. For instance, we reconstructed polar bear tracks. So a polar bear who walked through mountains of trash because he couldn't find enough food in the poles. Using live stream data from bear camps, we tried to harness network effect. So this can potentially generate financial and social credits for the protection of the species. Of course, this stays as an artistic expression for now, but it tries to illustrate how such system may look and feel like. Based on this, we're currently working with 21E8, the magic number company, to realize a blockchain camera system where chains of cameras can authenticate urban events amongst themselves to increase our capacities in retaining evidence for the much contested event landscapes in our Anthropocene. Potentially, we can have micro-licensing anchored on parts of the entity, be it human or post-human entities like trees or the North Pole. For instance, we can have the 3D scan of a polar bear. Let's call the polar bear Sam. We can have Sam micro-licensed, and whenever Sam or part of Sam generates a profit, either received a red pocket from Livestream or someone purchase the license for use, microvalues will be directed to NGOs for the protection of the species. While all transaction data is transparent and immutable on the blockchain, so that we would be able to know whether the money is indeed used for the bear. So this is some architecture stacks we're proposing based on John Nash's theory paper in agencies models. And these are my collaborators on this project. We come from very different disciplines and different countries where Livestream and algorithmic personalization actually got us together. You can get in touch with us via the link below and follow up on our progress. Second project is Candide, City Adversarial Network Design. So this is a project that formulates a new real-time visualization toolbox for architectural and urban design. The project considers the participatory authorship problem and aims at collapsing the linearity of pre- and post-production, also human-to-machine design flow. Currently, the process of decision-making in design involves repetitive negotiation and contractual matters. When we change a small bit in a design, it changes the entire digital model. Even if we use parametric tools, which helps to automate alterations, we will still have to re-execute the visualization, and that takes a lot of overtime and a lot of interns. People think that's what architects do, but no, this is what architects do. Imagine if it's on the scale of city planning, changing the building height of one small area would probably have 2 teams of interns working 2 more weeks of overtime to redo all the calculations and visualizations. Also, translating from 2D to 3D has been a fundamental problem in architecture since the time of Brunelleschi. So this is called the figure ground problem. It is the define of the boundary between spaces, often used to analyze private to public zoning ratio. Besides functional, it is also an aesthetic concern, a perceptual grouping problem, which is perfect to be coupled with machine vision. So we try to utilize this into our technical framework, which aims at formulating a computationally cheap toolbox using lightweight processes to enable a real-time collaborative modeling. So there are a lot of attempts for virtual desktop in architecture, but for modeling, it's especially challenging. Let's say we want to put a building information modeling system on the blockchain with decentralized computation. But such pipeline is just not very affordable outside central hubs, at least for the time being. It may work on the digital model with just a few megabytes, but BEAM models easily reach over a gigabyte or more. So we are trying to find alternative solutions. Of course, we're not trying to solve the problem overnight, but we're taking small, incremental, and economical steps as designers. Starting with a figure ground drawing, which can be acquired from any open source map box. The differences in color indicate the differences in building heights, so that naturally embeds 3D information in a 2D drawing. We took a small portion of the city and utilized a rule-based procedural processing on mesh tension analysis to generate a range of new city grids. Each has small articulated differences based on parameters. We can also do this with style transfer algorithms, but for the aim of this project, we do it the cheapest way possible computationally. So what's the difference in the generated grids? Well, in the fields of urbanism, the original grid is called a functional zoning, which promotes hygienes and highways. I mean, it can be good for Corona, but occasionally it promotes the death of American cities like Detroit because of the segregation in spaces. The generated grids are estimations between this and a more organic arrangement. So the mesh tension analysis helps to identify areas where it's too densely packed with high rises and those which are too segregated. This may help to provide options with better ventilation and circulation strategies to assist decision-making in urban design. So this functions a bit like an architecture machine as proposed by Negroponte in the 70s, that the designer or any user can become a curator on aesthetic decisions or become a system designer who formulates parameters and boundaries to the system, while the machine automates the processing and recommend adjacent articulations personalized to your demand. So of course, that's where decentralized indexing would be useful within a database of digital assets like architectural objects and building components. Now comes the biggest challenge, how to visualize it in near real time so we can communicate the design efficiently to a scattered chain of clients and contractors. The drawings already has building height data embedded. All we need is to extrude them using architectural softwares. We can do this at the snap of a finger, like using ZBrush or whatever, so that is not a problem. The whole digital model is labeled with colors for machine vision. For that, we still need some manual power, but we're working to figure this out. Potentially with a big enough set of synthetic data, we may be able to train a neural net for it. So then we flew a virtual camera around the city model and we plugged the image data into open source AI algorithms. In this case, generative adversarial neural network, thus the project name. This particular one is trained on German city data. We can also swap in a Hong Kong dataset or anywhere else on Earth that we need, and based on semantic labeling, it outputs a video visualization with pix-to-pix. So the one I'm showing you here is very computationally affordable. It compresses what would take days of work into just hours with a fully trained neural net. So there is also Pix-to-Pix HD, which offers higher resolution, but we're leveraging between cost, availability, and quality for the needs and capacity of different design works. For the next step of the project, we're thinking to expand it to a city-scale semantic labeling and personalized datasets, to which we may begin to classify stuff like wind corridors, transportations, infrastructural provisions, different types of zoning, and so on and so forth, to perform visualization for a broader range of design needs. We are also testing out integrating other open source AI into the pipeline, like GAMBreeder for static visuals. So here are my collaborators on this project. We are based around the world, and Livestream is one of our most used tools in co-working. So you can count on us that we will keep pushing to develop our work from virtual space sharing to time sharing. Anyhow, I normally do a little takeaway, but I don't have time to summarize today, but I will do it on Instagram. So make sure you smash that subscribe button. I'm going to end with a very cheesy tagline. The future is not urgent because it is already here, but our action is urgent. We've got to collectively reconfigure our modes of working, living, and even leisuring, where urbanism and ways we urbanize directly influence how we'll mitigate our climatic crisis. By transforming our econometrics from GDP to GDCO2. So one small incremental step at a time and we will get there. If you're interested in any of our projects or wishes to contribute to the conversation, feel free to send me an email. You can slide into my DM on Instagram as well. So you'll be able to find me at provides.ism. Thank you so much for listening.